I take the same commuter train into the city every weekday morning. I've done it for 3 years. Same platform, same time, same car mostly. When you do something that many times, it becomes completely automatic. You stop seeing it. You put your headphones in and stare at your phone, and 40 minutes later you're at your stop. That's how it works. So when a man sat down across from me on a Tuesday morning in November and said, "Good morning, Daniel," I assumed I knew him from somewhere and was blanking on where. I took my headphones out and said, "Good morning," back and looked at him, trying to place him. Mid-50s, gray at the temple, glasses, plain coat. Nothing familiar. I said, "I'm sorry, I'm blanking out here. How do we know each other?" He smiled and said, "Oh yeah, we don't. Just a friendly train." I put my headphones back in and moved on because what else do you do with that? Slightly odd but not alarming. My name is on my work badge, which was clipped to my back. He probably just glanced at it. Fine. The train stopped at Kelmore Avenue, which is the stop before mine, and as people shuffled around, he looked up from his phone and said, "Enjoy your coffee at Benson's. I always stop there before the office." I stared at him. He was already looking back at his phone. I got off at my stop and walked to Benson's and stood in line and tried to think of every possible innocent explanation for how a stranger on a train knew where I got my coffee. Maybe he worked near me. Maybe he'd seen me go in there before. Or maybe it was a guess because there's a Benson's nearly every downtown office building and lots of people stop for coffee. I ordered my usual and walked to the office and talked myself out of it by lunch. On Wednesday morning I got on the train and he was already in the same seat. He nodded at me like we were acquaintances. I sat 2 rows away facing a different direction. At Kelmore Avenue, he stood up to let someone past him and said almost casually, without even fully looking at me, that he hoped my brother was feeling better. My brother had been sick. Not publicly, not on social media, and not something I'd mentioned to anyone outside of close family and 2 friends. He'd come down with something bad the week before, and I've been worried about him. There was no version of that information being available to a stranger on a train. I got off at my stop and called my brother from the platform. He answered, and I told him what had just happened. He went quiet for a moment and then asked me to describe the man. I did. He said he didn't know anyone matching that description. I asked him if he'd mentioned being sick to anyone outside of family, and he said no. Barely anyone even knew. Called in late to work and sat on a bench on the platform for 20 minutes, trying to figure out what was happening. I went through every possible connection. Mutual friends, social media, somebody who knew someone, but nothing held up. My brother's last name isn't even the same as mine. He's married and in a different city. There was no thread connecting them that a stranger should have been able to pull. On Thursday, I almost didn't get on the train. I sat in my car in the station parking lot for 10 minutes. Then I told myself I wasn't going to let a strange man change my entire routine, and I got on. He wasn't there. Friday morning, he was back. I stood in the aisle and looked at him, and he looked at me, and I said directly out loud, "How do you know my name, and how do you know about my brother?" He looked genuinely confused. He said he was sorry, he didn't know what I meant. He said he didn't know my brother, didn't know anything about anyone being sick. He said he thought we'd just been making friendly small talk earlier in the week, and that he was sorry if he said anything that upset me. I stood there. He held eye contact the whole time, patient and calm and completely unbothered. I said he mentioned my brother being sick. He shook his head slowly and said he really didn't think he'd said that maybe I was thinking of a different conversation. Said it gently like he was concerned about me. I sat down 2 rows away and spent the entire ride staring at the back of his head, trying to decide if I was losing my mind. By the time I got to my stop, I was genuinely doubting myself. It had been a weird week. I had been stressed about my brother. Maybe I misheard, or maybe he said something generic about hoping someone felt better. My brain had filled in the rest. I almost convinced myself of that. Almost. When I stood up to get off, he turned around in his seat to face me and said, "Tell your dad I said hello." My father has been dead for 7 years. I got off the train and I have not taken that line since. I drive to work now. It costs me 40 minutes each way and $12 a day in parking, and I do not care even slightly. I filed a report with the transit authority. They reviewed platform footage and confirmed a man matching the description bore at the same stop as me on the days I mentioned. They were not able to identify him though. He has not been seen on that line since, or at least hasn't been flagged. I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know how he knew any of it, especially my father, and I have turned that question over in my head so many times that I've had to make myself stop because there is no answer I can arrive at that doesn't make everything worse. He knew. That's all I have. He knew things he had no way of knowing, and when I confronted him, he looked me in the eye and told me I was wrong. That last part might be the thing that scares me the most. This happened around 2006 when I was in my mid-20s, and my sister, the unfortunate main character in the story, had just turned 21. At the time, she and her boyfriend lived with my fiance and me. On weekends, we went out to one or two bars that had karaoke, air hockey, etc. This particular night, we were at the bar further out from where we lived in the city, a good half an hour by car. Everybody was having drinks and socializing with the people we knew. It was one of those places. Lots of regulars singing karaoke. Nothing out of the ordinary, really, except that night my sister started hanging out with these two older ladies who had a liquor store in their purses. And we were quite sharing, although I didn't know it at the time. As she tended to drink a lot more than me, that was a score for her. Less money spent on drinks, but she ended up far more hammered than usual. Towards the end of the night, around 1:45, she was really drunk. The aforementioned fiance, my sister's boyfriend, and I were in a heated air hockey game, planning to leave as soon as it was over. She walked up to us and said she was going to smoke a cigarette outside. Nothing unusual, because everybody did, until we were done. About 5 minutes later, we paid our tab and walked out, but she was not on the porch area where smokers congregated. Okay, weird, but not alarming. We went out back of the bar to check for her, inside, in the restroom, and in the large parking lot. It is notable that this particular bar was in a business park, so there were multiple businesses that were closed, as well as the Mexican restaurant next door that had just closed as well. We searched and asked everybody that knew us, and those who didn't if they had seen her. No one had. I asked the workers from the restaurant that were sitting outside as well. They seemed nervous when telling me they hadn't seen her, but I didn't think on that much until later. By then, I was in a full-on panic after trying to call her cell about 15 times, only to have it go to voicemail. Being a bit inebriated myself, I started searching for her. Went as far as to take my heels and start running down the highway searching for her. As honestly, there had been times she would start walking home in the past, though never from this place as it was so far away from where we lived. The fiancé and her boyfriend thought we should go to the house to see if she got someone to bring her home. Seemed unlikely but not unheard of. We get home and she's nowhere to be found. Just as we were about to head back and I was going to phone the police, I received a call from the police department on my phone. They indicated that they had my sister, that there had been an incident, and that I needed to get down there. We rushed to the police department, where we were taken into a room with my sister. Her face was red from obvious crying, and bruises were starting to show on her arms and chest. She said that when she told us she was going outside, she thought we said we were leaving then, so she walked to the car. After a few minutes, being drunk and tired, she sat down up against it to wait. A van pulled up and a young man was asking her for directions to somewhere. She walked closer to try to explain when suddenly the back door flew open and two other men grabbed her and threw her in, taking off. They were rough with her, hitting her a few times while holding her down, saying they only wanted money. They snatched her purse from her, breaking the straps, and searched it. Quite haphazardly, as they didn't find the $30 she had in it. After driving around a bit speaking in Spanish she couldn't understand, they pulled out a gun, making sure that she saw it, and put a bandana around her eyes, telling her they'd let her go. She was driven to some woods by a neighborhood she didn't know. The door was opened and they pushed her out, telling her to run and that if she took the blindfold off or turned around, they would shoot. She ran and ran. Eventually, she did take the blindfold off and came to the first door she saw, beating on it and screaming for help. The police were called and she was picked up, and now we are back to me being there, hearing what I feared had happened. Report filed. Police did a search and did locate the bandana she ripped off, but as she was so intoxicated and terrified, she was not able to give a clear description of the van other than white older model, or 3 occupants other than young Hispanic men. The investigation turned up nothing as no cameras caught any of this. Heck, we even had detectives in our home who said, "Look, we need the truth. If you got drunk and just went home with someone and didn't want your boyfriend to find out, we will file charges on you." Aside from the bruises, broken purse, and her trauma, there was nothing concrete to go on. That was unpleasant. I'm still fairly convinced somebody at the restaurant knew something given their suspicious behaviors when I asked about her, but the police were never able to find that link. All said and done, the guys were never found. Eventually, we all just moved on, in different states. It's now just a story in our lives. It still makes me sick thinking of what could have happened, but thankfully didn't. Be safe out there. Four of us rented the place for a long weekend in early July. Me, my 2 college friends, Bree and Simone, and Simone's boyfriend, Josh. We'd been talking about doing a trip together for almost 2 years and finally just committed to it. The Airbnb was in a small mountain town in North Carolina. One of those places that's charming in a very deliberate way. Little shops, hiking trails, and a main street with ice cream places and wine bars all squeezed together. Exactly what we wanted. The listing had great photos, a 5-star rating with over 40 reviews, and was priced reasonably for the area. We booked it 4 months in advance. The host's name on the listing was Gerald. His profile photo was of a man probably in his 60s, heavy-set with a white beard and friendly enough looking. His reviews were all glowing. Wonderful host, very responsive, lovely property, left us alone and let us enjoy our stay. That last part specifically was something multiple reviewers mentioned and something we were counting on. 4 friends on a long weekend do not need a host hovering around. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The property was a standalone cottage about a 10-minute drive from the main town strip, tucked back from the road on a decent-sized lot with trees on 3 sides. Nice porch, good-sized living room, 3 bedrooms, and a full kitchen. It looked exactly like the photos. We were happy. Gerald was there when we pulled up. He was standing on the porch waiting for us, which wasn't unusual for a check-in. Some hosts do that. He was exactly like his profile photo. Big guy, white beard, flannel shirt, very warm handshake, and a wide smile. He walked us through the property, showed us how the fireplace worked, pointed out where extra towels were, and gave us his number in case anything came up. Normal host stuff. He was friendly and talkative, and I remember thinking he seemed like a genuinely nice older man. He left after about 20 minutes and we settled in, changed, and drove into town for dinner. First time he came back was that same night around 9:30. We were all on the porch with drinks, watching the tree line go dark, and his truck pulled up the driveway. He got out and waved and said he was just stopping by to make sure everything was comfortable and that we had everything we needed. We said yes, everything was great. He chatted for about 10 minutes, standing at the base of the porch steps, and then said to enjoy the rest of the night and left. Bree said that was a little much after he pulled away. The rest of us agreed, but nobody was particularly alarmed. Some hosts are just attentive. Saturday was a full day. We hiked in the morning, ate in town, came back in the afternoon, and napped and recovered. By evening, we had the fireplace going and music on, and were having a genuinely great time. Around 8, Gerald's truck came up the driveway again. This time he had a bottle of local wine with him. Said he thought we might enjoy it. That was from a vineyard about 20 minutes up the road. He handed it to Josh at the door and then stood there in the doorway talking for a while. I noticed he kept looking past Josh into the living room while he talked. Not in an obvious way, just his eyes moving around the room taking things in. We thanked him for the wine, and Josh said that we were about to eat dinner, and Gerald said, of course, enjoy your evening, and left. 4 of us looked at each other after the door closed. Josh said something like, okay, that's twice now, and Simone said maybe he's just lonely. We opened the wine and moved on. Sunday morning I woke up earlier than everybody else and went to the kitchen to make coffee. While I was waiting for it to brew, I noticed something on the kitchen counter I hadn't seen before. A small framed photograph is sitting next to the toaster. I picked it up. It was a photo of the cottage's interior, the living room specifically, taken from somewhere near the hallway, looking toward the couch in the front window. It was clearly taken from inside the property. The couch, the rug, the lamp in the corner, all exactly as they were now. What made me set the photo down slowly was that there were people in it. A family. A couple and 2 kids are sitting on the couch watching television. Guests clearly from a previous stay. Just a completely normal photo of people inside the house who almost certainly had no idea anybody was taking their picture. I stood there looking at it for a moment. Then I looked at the walls around the kitchen and the living room more carefully than I had when we arrived. There were 4 more framed photos throughout the downstairs. All interiors of the cottage, all taken from inside, and all containing guests who appeared completely unaware the photo was being taken. A group of women at the kitchen table, a man asleep on the couch, 2 people by the fireplace, backs to the camera. I woke Bree up first because she's the most level-headed of all of us, and I needed someone to look at them with me before I said anything to Simone and Josh. Bree looked at each photo without saying anything for a long time and then said we need to check the smoke detectors. It took us about 4 minutes to find it. In the living room smoke detector, which was positioned centrally on the ceiling with a clear view of the entire downstairs, the light was wrong. Smoke detectors have a single small indicator light. This one had 2. Bree stood on a chair and looked at it up close and came down and said there was a lens behind the casing. I called Airbnb immediately. Then I called the local police non-emergency line and they sent an officer within the hour. The officer confirmed what Bree had found. A small camera, angled to cover the living room and part of the kitchen. The officer bagged it and said they would need to speak with Gerald. We found out later through Airbnb's follow-up that Gerald had been flagged once before on the platform for a guest complaint that had not been specific enough to result in removal. They suspended his listing immediately and cooperated with local police. Whether any actual charges came from it, I genuinely don't know, because Airbnb's communication after the initial follow-up became very vague very quickly, in a way that suggests lawyers got involved. What I keep thinking about is the framed photos on the walls. That's the part that goes beyond a hidden camera, which is already a serious violation. Those photos were displayed openly. He framed them and put them out like decorations. Pictures of his guests taken without their knowledge inside their temporary home hung on the walls for the next guest to walk right past without knowing what they were looking at. We walked past them for 2 days. I don't know if that was carelessness or something else. I don't know if he got some specific satisfaction from having them out in the open where nobody knew what they were. I've thought about it a lot, and I still don't have an answer that makes me feel better about it. We left Sunday afternoon, a day early. The drive home was pretty quiet. We haven't booked an Airbnb since. All 4 of us check smoke detectors and air purifiers and clocks and anything else with a small opening when we stay anywhere new. It takes about 10 minutes, and we do it every single time without discussing it. It's just what we do now. This happened when I was 4 or 5 years old. I was at a rather large toy store with my dad and sister, who is 2 years older than me, so that I could pick out a birthday present for a friend of mine. My dad and I were looking at the Legos they had available, while my sister was shuffling around, bored out of her mind. At some point she wandered away. I was looking at the box of a castle set, wishing that it was my birthday coming up, when my sister returned and tugged on my dad's arm. "What is it, sweetheart?" he asked, without looking away from the box he was holding. I think he also wished it was his birthday coming up. "There's a man." "Oh, never mind, he's gone now." My dad looked at her, putting the box back on the shelf. "What man?" he asked. "There was a man who asked if I wanted to come see his puppy, and I said that I'd have to ask you first, but I don't know where he went." My dad took the box out of my hands and put it back on the shelf, then took my hand in his and put his other hand around my sister's shoulders. "Well, let's go find him," my dad exclaimed and began leading us to the checkouts and exit. Now, like I said, this toy store was rather large and we were walking pretty fast. When we got near the checkouts, my sister pointed at a man who was just about to leave the store and said, "That's him." I could see how she recognized him from behind, as he had very long hair. It went halfway down his back. I remember him having a black winter coat on, which was strange because it was a pretty warm day. We walked even faster until we were at the nearest checkout, and my dad said to us, "Stay here with this nice lady for a second," referring to the cashier. He then ran up behind the man, who was now almost out the door, and threw his hand on his shoulder so hard I could hear it. My dad spun him around to face him, then began yelling, "Where's the puppy?" People around started looking over at the commotion, and my dad continued, "You wanted to take my daughter to see your puppy, so where is it? I want to see it now." The man was stammering, trying to get away, but my dad had a firm grasp on the guy's shoulder. Turning his head to where we were standing, my dad yelled to my sister, "Is this the guy who asked you to come see his puppy?" My sister silently nodded her head, then looked at her shoes. I think she thought she was in trouble. I don't blame her. Our dad was yelling pretty loud. "Is the puppy in your car? Where is it?" He pointed out the glass door into the parking lot. I remember thinking that if he just let go of the guy, he could lead us to the puppy. Before I knew it, 3 men in yellow jackets had come. There was a word on their jackets, which I couldn't read, though I knew all of the letters. Security. My dad let go of the man, and the guys in the yellow held him instead. My sister was crying by this point. My dad walked back to us, once again taking my hand in one of his own and putting his other around my sister's shoulders. He asked the cashier if she had a phone he could use, and she took us to the office. He called her mom to come pick us up, then assured my sister that she was not in trouble. In fact, she was in the least amount of trouble anyone has ever been in the history of the world, simply by coming and asking for his permission to see the puppy. I asked him if we were still going to see it, and he just looked at me and said, "Sorry son, the puppy ran away." Our mom came in for just a few minutes, and as we were leaving, there were police cars pulling up. "Are they going to help find the puppy?" My sister asked my mom, but she said, "No, they're here for something else." The other day, after reading through a lot of stories here, I remembered this incident and asked my dad about it. Apparently, when the cops searched his car, they found rope, duct tape, a knife, pliers, and a hacksaw. My dad and sister testified at his trial, and the guy got 20 years, which means, barring other circumstances, he's out now. I also asked my dad if my sister knows about the stuff in his car. He said no, and to please keep it that way. I want to preface this by saying I'm not an outdoorsy person by nature. I grew up in the suburbs. My idea of nature was the park down the street, and the closest I ever got to fishing as a kid was one of those carnival games where you hook a plastic duck. So when my uncle gave me his old fishing setup after he moved out of state, 2 rods, a tackle box, a net, the whole thing, and told me I should try it, I kind of laughed it off. The gear sat in my closet for 8 months. Then I had a rough stretch. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of accumulation of stress that hits you in your early 20s when everything feels uncertain and loud and you can't quite get ahead of it. A friend mentioned that fishing alone was the most peaceful thing he'd ever done. That there was something about sitting next to water that was still with nothing to do but wait that genuinely reset him. I didn't have a better idea, so I looked up a public fishing spot within an hour of my apartment. Watched about 45 minutes of beginner videos on YouTube. Packed my uncle's gear into my car and drove out on a Saturday morning in late September. The lake was called Harrow Lake. Small, maybe a mile across. Sitting inside a state forest about 50 minutes outside the city. There was a small gravel parking area off the main road that fit maybe 8 cars. A wooden board with a trail map nailed to a post and a path that ran along the eastern shoreline. According to the fishing forums I looked at, the best spots were on the northern end where the water got shallower and the bass tended to gather near the reeds. I got there around 7 in the morning. One other car in the lot, and it was an old pickup that looked like it had been there a while. I grabbed my gear and followed the trail north along the shore. The morning was cold and quiet, and the lake was completely still. That dark mirror surface you get before the wind picks up. I found a flat rocky section on the northern bank with good access to the water and set up there. I had no idea what I was doing, but I had my phone with the YouTube videos queued up, and I figured I'd sort it out. For the first couple of hours, it was exactly what my friend had described. Genuinely, surprisingly peaceful. I got the hang of casting after an embarrassing number of attempts. Got my line in the water and just sat there on a rock with a coffee from the gas station down the road and let the morning happen around me. I didn't catch anything, but I also didn't care. The whole point was sitting still, and it was working. My head was quieter than it had been in months. By mid-morning, the sun was fully up, and the light on the water was nice, and I had fully committed to the idea that fishing was going to become a regular thing for me. I was relaxed. That's when I noticed the man on the opposite shore. The lake was narrow enough at the northern end that the far bank was clearly visible, maybe 150 yards across. There was a figure standing at the water's edge on the other side. I noticed him mostly because he was completely still, which stood out against the tree line behind him, just standing at the edge of the water looking out at the lake. I didn't think much of it. Probably another fisherman, I figured. I looked back at my line and forgot about him for a while. About 20 minutes later, I looked up again. He hadn't moved. Same spot, same posture, facing the water. I watched him for a moment. He wasn't holding a rod. His arms were at his sides, and he was just standing at the very edge of the bank where the grass met the water, completely motionless, staring out at the lake. I told myself he was just taking in the view. People hike out here, not just fishermen. I looked back at my line, but I kept checking. Every 10 minutes or so, I'd glance across, and he'd be in the same spot. Same position, not sitting down and not moving along the shore. Not doing anything that suggested he had any purpose for being there other than standing and staring at the water. By the 3rd or 4th time I checked and found him in the exact same position, I started to feel that low hum of unease that I'm sure you know. The one that doesn't have a specific reason attached to it yet. Around noon, I ate the sandwich I'd packed and decided I'd give it another hour and head home. I was still enjoying myself, but the man across the water had taken the edge off the peacefulness in a way I couldn't quite shake. I kept telling myself it was nothing. He was just a guy who likes standing by water. People are allowed to stand by the water. Then he started moving. Not along the shoreline, but into the water. He waded in slowly, fully clothed up to his knees, and then stopped. He just stood there in the lake in his clothes in late September when the water temperature had to be somewhere in the low 50s. He didn't react to the cold the way a person normally would. No hesitation and no sharp intake of breath. No visible shock. He just walked in and stopped like he was standing on a sidewalk. I was fully watching him now. I wasn't even pretending to fish. He stood there in the water for a long time. Maybe 5 full minutes, and then he reached down and put both hands into the water in front of him and held them there submerged. Not washing them. Not doing anything purposeful, just holding them under the surface completely still. Then he straightened up and looked directly across the lake at me. I don't know how to explain how I knew he was looking at me specifically. The distance was significant and I couldn't make out his face clearly, but the shift in his posture was unmistakable. He had been looking at the water and then he was looking at me. Somehow across 150 yards of open lake, that was completely obvious. I started packing up my gear. Not frantically, but with the kind of focused efficiency that kicks in when your body has made a decision before your brain is caught up. I broke down the rod, packed the tackle box, and rolled up my line. The whole time I didn't look back across the water because something in me didn't want to know what he was doing while I was doing that. When I finally had everything together and stood up, I looked across one more time. He was out of the water, standing back on the shore in the same spot he'd been in all morning, watching me, still completely motionless, arms at his sides, soaking wet in the cold air. I walked back down the trail to the parking lot at a pace that was faster than it needed to be. The old pickup was still there when I got back to my car. I loaded my gear into the trunk and I got in and sat there for a second with the engine running. I had to drive past the southern end of the lake to get back to the main road. The road curved along the shore for maybe a quarter mile before it turned back into the tree line. As I drove that stretch, I looked out the passenger window at the far bank of the lake out of habit. It was on my side of the lake now. I don't know how. The lake had no bridge. The only way around it on foot was a trail that ran the full perimeter and would have taken at least 25 minutes to walk at a normal pace. I had been in the parking lot for maybe 6 or 7 minutes. He was standing on the near bank on my side of the lake, maybe 50 yards from the road, in his wet clothes, watching my car drive past. I did not stop. I drove back to the main road and then to the highway, and I didn't fully exhale until I was back in the city. I have been back to Harrow Lake twice since then, both times with other people and both times during busy weekend mornings when the lot was full and there were other people on the trail. Nothing unusual either time. Peaceful and quiet and exactly what it's supposed to be. But I've never gone back alone and I don't think I will. I still think about how we got to my side of the lake that fast. I've looked at the trail map online and measured it out, and there is no route that makes it possible in that amount of time on foot. I've tried to come up with an explanation and I don't have one that holds up. I just know what I saw through that passenger window. Wet clothes, arms at his sides, watching my car from 50 yards away. I drove a lot faster after that.